the Pashtun people that live below the poverty line in Northwest Frontier Province. 40%.
Right. And we did not care about that, which tells them that we don't care about you as people.
As people. And
right.
we don't respect your faith.
And we don't respect it. How do you get trained in international relations? And what has to change? Because these are obviously problems that are going to continue and continue and continue, and people want to be better at it. So what should we do?
Well, we're a think tank with legs.
All right.
If you're feeling less poetic, it's a think and do tank. Think before you do.
All right.
And in kingdom theology speak, it's understanding the Great Commandment was given before the Great Commission.
Yes, it was, wasn't it? Love your
neighbor.
And
when you love your neighbor, love them, make the recipient the point of reference, not yourself. I'm not going to go love you according to my understanding of how the church has evolved in America. I'm going to love you according to your cultural context in a language and logic that you can receive. It's not paternalism, it's horizontalism coming alongside and saying, okay, what is going on there? And oh, by the way, God's already at work in these cultures and he doesn't need us.
That's
He's
right.
sovereign, but if we're listening, he will give us the precious privilege of coming alongside what he's already doing through Christian leaders and non-Christian leaders that he raises up for his purpose
That's right.
and his time in these places.
That's right, like the chief minister and the
Absolutely.
person in Vietnam, and you have examples across the globe with that sort of thing. So your institute does conferences,
yeah,
and some other resources. It has a journal of faith and international affairs.
Yep. The bottom line is, if you're going to love in a language and logic that they understand,
right,
learn how to love, or don't go, because you'll tarnish the name of the one who sent you.
That's right.
And that means you have to be educated. So if you're going to be educated, you need to be thinking about international affairs. That's why we created the Council on Faith and International Affairs, which originally...
is not just Christians.
Well, originally it was because we wanted to prove that evangelicals could write with footnotes.
Okay, which is what your journal is about.
Right. And then we decided, oh my gosh, the vacuum is so big in the field of international relations, which has been totally left behind. Again,
right.
This is back in 2001, 2002, having this discussion. And we said, we got to make this multi-faith. This is the only journal of record in the field of international affairs on faith international affairs.
Wow.
The only one. So it's the best one. You can't afford not to read it. But that demonstrates
right.
how big this
right.
hole is in our
right.
understanding of how we engage the world, where religion can have a legitimate place in our understanding of international affairs. And oh, by the way, it's in our self-interest to understand it because the rest of the world thinks that way, particularly the Muslim world.
So has your business, in the sense of educating the foreign affairs experts, increased in Washington? Are you getting people who are coming to these conferences? They're held all over the world. As the interest just continued to peak?
Absolutely. It just keeps coming and coming. We have more business than we know what to do with, and we say no to a lot of things. We're only 8 people. But because we were there at the very beginning,
right.
a lot of folks come to us and say, hey, you've been thinking about this. Christians are doing it. We have a thing called the Global Engagement Network, which exists to challenge Christians about getting back to kingdom theology.
Right.
We do an annual conference called the Global Leadership Forum. We just did one last fall in Washington that challenged Christians to think about how they steward their citizenships, kingdom, global, American. And we had people like Nadine Albright come in and give her perspective. We had Michael Gerson, former speechwriter for President Bush, come in and give his perspective. We had 2 Muslim leaders come in and say, here's how you're perceived, evangelicals. Here's how we have things in common.
Right. Learn about
powerful stuff. And in the meantime, as we work overseas and try and create this space for religion and politics to be talked about, we're also working with secular organizations like the Council on Foreign Relations, where I'm a member. I'm on a charter member of the Religious Advisory Committee to the President of the Council of Foreign Relations, which is, as they will tell you, the preeminent think tank in America, but also other major think tanks. We work with Brookings. We are part of the U.S. Islamic World Forum that takes place every year in Doha, in Qatar. We've worked with Carnegie Endowment for International Peace.
So you're across the field, just like you are in the religious conversation across the field.
Our metric for success is that we take fire from the left and right, theologically and politically. It's back to that radical middle.
So you have to have some Teflon on you, don't you?
Yeah, or just be stupid enough to say, hey, Lord, you're calling, I'm trying to be obedient, we're going to go after it.
You're my master. If you say I've done a good job, that's what matters to me.
Absolutely. You got to be careful on that, because there's a fine line between certitude and stubbornness, courage and stupidity. And hopefully we're on the former side of those lines. So you always have to test these things. And my feeling of how you test things is, the Lord's going to come over and hit you over the head with a 2x4. About the 10th time, that's when I know, okay, this is really
I better
from
do
you.
it.
Because if it's from God, there's no such thing as once in a lifetime.
Now, you have argued for a two-state solution to Israel and Palestine, and that has raised some controversy.
Yeah, it's been interesting. I had no desire to engage on Israel-Palestine. Obviously, it's a super important issue.
It is.
But it's not where we were working. We work in East Asia and we work in Central and South Asia.
All right.
And the more I went to Doha and encountered sort of secular elites from all over the world, but also devout Muslims, it became very apparent to me.
This is a knuckle in this problem.
This is a huge, huge issue.
That's
and
right.
so I began to think about it to my own fault. I began to first think about it as a national security issue.
Okay.
The Muslim world sees the U.S. through the prism of Israel-Palestine.
Right.
I don't care what your opinion is about Israel-Palestine, the conflict, or your theology. It is a fact that we are perceived as less than even-handed and supporting my Israel right or wrong.
Right.
And evangelicals, because if you're Christian, if you're American, therefore you're Christian, therefore you're evangelical, political, strident, unforgiving, then the evangelicals who are in the press the most, which are a minority,
right.
but people will say, my Israel right or wrong, and we can't allow anything, we can't give. And in the process, we're perceived as this unforgiving dimension. But the other thing that's totally ironic is we're perceived as not having time to love our Palestinian neighbor, who is Muslim, but
right.
they're also Palestinian Christians.
Right.
And they come back to us and say,
Where are you?
Where are you? We were the first people to receive the
right.
gospel in
right.
Palestine.
Right.
Jews living in Palestine. And here we are trying to make a difference.
Right. So there isn't really an issue that you're unafraid to go into if called to do so.
Absolutely. You have to go in, you have to engage, and then you have to be able to speak truth to power to both sides. You know, there are a lot of Christians who are on the progressive or liberal side, strong evangelical, conservative theology, but all they talk about is the suffering Palestinians.
Right.
There is an undeniable culture of death among Palestinians that leads to suicide bombing.
Right.
But there's also Israelis who are creating ghettos in West Bank in the name of national security and inviting and growing more hatred and terrorism.
Right.
And you have to be able to speak to both sides and say, look, how do we transcend this? And I think this is where religion and people of the book have to come back to, okay, what is it that we have in common? And it's a sovereign God. We'll disagree on many elements of the theology and the divinity of Christ, but we believe in a sovereign God who cares about justice and peace. How do we operate at that intersection? And therefore, how do we encourage that conversation to take place?
Amen. My guest today has been Chris Seiple, president of the Institute for Global Engagement in Washington. I'm Shirley Hoekstra, and thank you for watching Inner Compass.
Funding for Inner Compass is provided by Calvin College.
The life that's unfolding,
the world that awaits,
gifts that are yours to explore,
and God's to use.
It's all happening here at Calvin.